Hey there, and welcome back to another deep dive on The Explainer. Today, we're exploring the fascinating and honestly often pretty surprising origin story of one of the 20th century's most defining figures, Margaret Thatcher. Long before she became known globally as the Iron Lady and eventually the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century, her life was full of unexpected turns. So we're going to strip away the complex political legacy just for a moment, and we're going to look at the raw data of her early years. This journey from a small-town upbringing to the chemistry laboratory and then all the way to the highest levels of government is just packed with fascinating details. Okay, let's dive into this with the central contradiction of her origin story. How exactly does a research chemist transition into a history-making political figure? Because, let's be honest, it is definitely not your typical career path. Keep this question in the back of your mind as we go, because the highly analytical, methodical mindset she developed in the laboratory deeply influenced how she later navigated the incredibly volatile world of British politics. Section 1. The Grocer's Daughter, Roots in Grantham. Born Margaret Hilda Roberts back in 1925 in Grantham, Lincolnshire, she was the daughter of a local grocer who was also a strict Methodist preacher and the town's mayor. And, you can clearly see that highly disciplined upbringing reflected in her incredibly busy youth. Margaret didn't just work in the family grocery shop, she was absolutely constantly pushing herself. Her school reports noted continual improvement. She played the piano, she played field hockey, and she even participated in poetry recitals. But it actually goes a lot deeper than just your typical extracurriculars. During the Second World War, she volunteered as a fire watcher in the local ARP service. And even more striking, in 1938, she and her sister saved up their own pocket money to help pay for the journey of a teenage Jewish refugee who was escaping Nazi Germany, offering her sanctuary. That formidable work ethic and deeply disciplined character, they were locked in very early on. But despite her father's strict Methodist teachings, young Margaret was already showing a highly analytical mind. Get this, she reportedly told a friend that she could not believe in angels because she had mathematically calculated that they would need a breastbone 6 feet long just to support their wings. I mean, it is just a fantastic illustration of her early, data-driven, scientific approach to the world. She was looking for structural proof, even when it came to matters of faith. Moving on to Section 2, The Unlikely Scientist, From Oxford to Ice Cream. In 1943, that analytical mind took her to Somerville College, Oxford, where she studied chemistry under the Nobel laureate Dorothy Hodgkin. After graduating with a second-class honors degree, she hit the workforce. She started out at a plastics firm, researching how to attach polyvinyl chloride to metals. But in 1948, she set her sights a bit higher. She applied for a position at Imperial Chemical Industries, or ICI. Now, this was a massive, highly prestigious company at the time, a major stepping stone for any chemist. But things didn't go exactly as planned. She was outright rejected by the personnel department. And the assessment they wrote down is absolutely fascinating. They rejected her for being headstrong, obstinate, and dangerously self-opinionated. Talk about an incredible piece of historical irony, right? The very harsh HR assessment that disqualified her from a corporate chemistry job perfectly foreshadows the exact traits that would later define her famously unyielding political persona. So instead of ECI, she takes this really fascinating detour. She becomes a research chemist for J. Lyons & Co. in Hammersmith. Her work there was heavily focused on a process called saponification. She was specifically researching emulsifiers, stabilizers, and food preservatives. Her research was reportedly part of a team developing emulsifiers for soft-serve ice cream. This highly theoretical work even led to her publishing a paper in the Journal of the Science of Food and Agriculture in 1951, which, by the way, remains her one and only published scientific paper. But chemistry was really only half of her Oxford and post-Oxford story, because while she was running lab experiments, she was also forging a deep ideological foundation. During her university years, she served as the president of the Oxford University Conservative Association. Crucially, she was heavily influenced by Friedrich Hayek's 1944 book, The Road to Serfdom. The book condemned government economic intervention as a precursor to authoritarianism. This text didn't just sit on her shelf. It became a massive intellectual cornerstone for the policies she would fiercely champion decades later. Section 3. The Political Ascent, Entering the Arena. Her enthusiasm for politics had always run parallel to science, and in 1950 she officially made her move. And her climb was remarkably swift. Look at this. In 1947, she graduates from Oxford. By 1950, she's running for parliament in Dartford. Though she lost there, she heavily reduced the opposing majority as the youngest and only female conservative candidate in the country. In 1953, showing this incredible capacity for work, she qualifies as a barrister specializing in taxation. Finally, in 1959, she's elected as a member of parliament for Finchley. And boom, by 1970, she's appointed to a major cabinet position. It's just a relentless upward trajectory driven by intense preparation and sheer ambition. Now, as a member of parliament, her early voting record really defies simple categorization, and this brilliantly illustrates how incredibly complex her early political stances were. On one hand, she voted for the restoration of birching as a corporal punishment, and she supported retaining capital punishment. Yet simultaneously, she was one of the very few conservative MPs to support the bill to decriminalize male homosexuality, and she actually voted in favor of legalizing abortion. She was piecing together a distinct political identity that didn't always conform to the strict party expectations of the era. Which brings us to Section 4, the Education Secretary Testing Resilience. In 1970, she entered the cabinet and almost immediately found herself right at the center of fierce public controversies. One of the major educational debates at the time was the push to convert tiered grammar schools into comprehensive schools. Thatcher was personally committed to preserving the grammar school system, honoring her own educational roots. During her tenure as Secretary of State for Education and Science, she successfully saved 94 grammar schools from closure, turning down hundreds of proposals from local education authorities who wanted to convert them. However, the data tells a deeply fascinating story about the reality of her time in office. Because despite her personal stance and her actual efforts to save those grammar schools, the overall momentum of the system was shifting. At the start of her tenure, 32% of pupils attended comprehensive schools. But by the end of her time as Education Secretary, that number had nearly doubled to 62%. As a leader, she established guidelines, but still approved the vast majority of comprehensive school proposals based on local educational considerations. But the policy she is most famously remembered for during this specific period was a harsh spending cut, abolishing free milk for school children aged 7 to 11. While it caused a massive public outcry and earned her a notorious nickname in the press, she maintained that milk should still be provided on medical grounds. She specifically kept a provision of 0.3 imperial pints daily for the youngest children purely for nutritional purposes. The intense public backlash from the milk controversy was a defining crucible for her. It tested her limits, absolutely, but rather than destroying her career, it essentially forged her unyielding public identity. Speaking to a newspaper editor during the absolute height of the controversy, she drew a line in the sand. She said, "Don't underestimate me. I saw how they broke Keith, but they won't break me." That complete refusal to bend under extreme public pressure, that became her signature characteristic. So the crucial point here is that despite this growing formidable reputation and her rapid rise through the ranks, she still had some significant blind spots about her own future. In 1970, the very same year she entered the cabinet, she made a wildly inaccurate prediction. She said, "There will not be a woman prime minister in my lifetime. The male population is too prejudiced." It is just incredible to think that the woman who would shatter that exact ceiling just 9 years later couldn't foresee her own historic triumph. Which leaves us with a final provocative question to think about. How do early contradictions and severe public trials forge a leader for an unprecedented future? From calculating the wingspan of angels to researching ice cream emulsifiers and weathering intense political storms over school milk, every single piece of this unique origin story prepared Margaret Thatcher to become the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century. It's a powerful reminder that the leaders who shape history often emerge from the most unlikely of laboratories. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.